You know that feeling, right? When you're maybe listening to some English speakers and there's a joke, everyone laughs, but you're just standing there thinking, what did I miss?
Oh, absolutely. That sense of being slightly outside the joke.
Exactly. Like there's some secret code you haven't cracked. Maybe it was said with a totally straight face or it sounded simple, but, wasn't.
Well, that feeling often bumps right up against the fascinating and sometimes bewildering world of English humor.
Which is exactly what we're diving into today. We got some really great source material, listener provided actually, that analyzes English humor. It just felt like the perfect topic for us to explore more deeply.
Yeah, and it's about more than just, getting a joke, isn't it? Understanding the humor gives you such a insight into English communication style, maybe even the culture itself.
Right. Humor's so wrapped up in what a culture values, how people see things. So digging into it feels like getting a look under the hood, so to speak.
hmm It really is a cultural fingerprint in many ways.
So think of the sources you sent as a roadmap. They're analytical, looking at joke structures, puns, sarcasm, that classic understatement, self-deprecation, all that good stuff.
They really try to unpack the why behind what makes them laugh.
So our mission today, pull out those key features, the cultural background from these analyses, make it clear, engaging, and hopefully give you a few aha moments along the way.
Sounds like a plan. So where should we start this unpacking process? There's quite a bit here.
Okay, well, let's maybe tackle some of those core characteristics that just kept coming up. First off, this idea of dryness or deadpan humor. What's really going on there? Why is that funny?
Yeah, deadpan. It's fascinating because the humor is almost entirely in the contrast, isn't it?
Contrast between what?
Between the content, which might be really witty or absurd, and the delivery, which is totally straight-faced. Minimal emotion.
Ah, right.
So the joke doesn't come from funny faces or voices. It comes from the listener having to bridge that gap themselves, recognizing the humor despite the serious presentation.
So it puts a bit of work on the listener, like you have to be clever enough to spot it.
Exactly. There's a subtle satisfaction in getting it, like you're in on the secret.
Okay, that makes sense. Then there's understatement. The sources often mentioned litotes.
Yes, litotes. That's the technical term for expressing something significant in a really restrained, often kind of negative way. What example stuck out for you?
Oh, the classics. Calling a complete catastrophe a spot of bother.
Right.
Or saying something truly brilliant is not half bad. It's deliberately downplaying it.
And culturally, that links back to perhaps a preference for emotional reserve, avoiding hyperbole, maybe even a bit of stoicism.
Keeping a stiff upper lip, sort of.
Sort of, yeah. This signals you're not easily flustered. You're keeping things in perspective, even if that perspective seems, well, wildly understated to an outsider.
Right. Okay, moving on to slightly trickier ground, perhaps. Irony, sarcasm, often lumped together. What's the key difference we need to get?
Well, irony is the broader concept. It's basically a gap between what's said and what's meant, or between expectation and reality. It doesn't have to be, mean.
Okay.
Sarcasm, though, is usually described as a type of verbal irony, but it's sharper. It's got an edge. It's usually intended to mock or show disapproval.
So irony can be a gentle observation, maybe, while sarcasm is more pointed, like you're aiming it at someone or
Exactly.
something.
Think of irony as maybe a raised eyebrow. Sarcasm is more of a deliberate eye roll, perhaps with the twist of the knife.
And the sources really stressed how vital context and tone are here. You can't just read the word.
Oh, absolutely not. Someone saying, "Oh, fantastic," after dropping their entire lunch.
Yeah.
The tone tells you everything. Flat, maybe slightly weary.
Right. Not genuine enthusiasm.
Definitely not. It's those subtle vocal cues, the facial expression, the situation itself. They all work together to signal the real meaning.
Which can be hard to catch if you're not attuned to that specific cultural style, I guess.
Precisely. Now, another big one that came up constantly was self-deprecation, making fun of oneself. The English seem particularly good at this. Why?
Yeah, what's the deal with that?
The analyses point to a few things. Firstly, it's a great social leveler. If you mock yourself gently, you instantly seem less threatening, less arrogant.
Makes you more approachable.
Right. It signals, I don't take myself too seriously. Plus, there might be a cultural discomfort sometimes with overt displays of achievement. Self-deprecation can kind of preempt any accusation of boasting.
Ah, okay. A bit of strategic humility.
You could call it that. And it builds rapport,
Yeah.
Acknowledging your own flaws, laughing about them, it makes you relatable. We're all imperfect.
It's like saying, yeah, I know I messed up, but with a laugh, it takes the sting out.
Exactly. Then we get to wordplay. Puns, double meanings. There seems to be a real fondness for messing about with language.
Despite the groans they often get.
Yes. Despite the whole lowest form of wit tag, puns are everywhere. The sources suggested genuine appreciation for the flexibility and maybe the inherent silliness of English.
So, playing with words that sound the same but mean different things. Homophones.
Homophones, yeah, and homographs spelled the same, different meanings or pronunciation. And of course, the double entendre where a phrase has two meanings, one often a bit cheeky.
Can you give us a classic example that illustrates that? Maybe one from the sources?
Well, they mentioned things like the sign on a music shop, gone Chopin, Bach soon.
Okay, yeah. That definitely gets a groan.
It does, but you see it constantly. From Shakespeare right down to shop names and headlines, it seems deeply ingrained.
Why, though? Why this enduring love?
Could be several reasons. The richness of the language itself invites it. It's a small intellectual puzzle spotting the double meaning. Maybe it's a very understated way of being clever.
And maybe, as one source hinted, even the shared groan itself is a weird form of bonding.
That's a great point. That collective, oh, honestly, reaction, it creates a shared moment.
Okay, so we've got dryness, understatement, irony, sarcasm, self-deprecation, wordplay. What other key traits were highlighted?
Definitely observational humor, finding the funny in everyday life, the little absurdities we all experience.
Like queuing or the weather.
Exactly. Also, a strong thread of surrealism and absurdism. Think Monty Python, just embracing the completely nonsensical.
Right. Logic goes out the window.
Pretty much. And a focus on social awkwardness, embarrassment, failure. Those moments make for surprisingly good comedy. And sometimes, yeah, a touch of cynicism or pessimism weaving through it all.
That sense that things might just go a bit wrong. There's comfort in that, oddly.
There can be. So those are sort of the ingredients. How do they get baked into an actual joke in this context?
Yeah.
What's the basic structure?
Is it just the standard setup and punchline?
Fundamentally, yes.
Yeah.
Setup creates the context, builds expectation, and the punchline delivers the twist, the subversion, the surprise that triggers the laugh. But the types of jokes can vary quite a bit.
Okay, like what?
Well, we mentioned observational finding humor in shared experiences. Think of comedians talking about the nightmare of assembling flat-pack furniture.
Relatable pain.
Exactly. Then you have quick, witty one-liners, often relying on puns or clever phrasing. You know, like that Tim Vine joke. I've just been on a once-in-a-lifetime holiday, I'll tell you what, never again.
Huh. Okay.
Then anecdotal jokes, longer stories about personal mishaps, and the surreal, absurdist stuff like the Ministry of Silly Walks. Pure illogical fun.
And what about those really long ones? Shaggy dog stories.
Ah, yes. The ones that meander on and on, building you up for, often, a very weak or non-existent punchline. The humor there is almost in the endurance test, the shared joke about the joke being pointless.
You've got to admire the commitment.
You do. And political jokes, of course, using satire and irony. But crucially, as the sources stressed, context is everything. Who's telling it? Who's listening? Where are they? It all massively affects how it's received.
It's never just the words themselves, is it?
Rarely. There's a whole layer of unspoken understanding.
Okay, let's circle back to puns for a sec. We talked about the fondness for them. Can we break down the mechanics a bit more? How do they actually work linguistically?
Sure. As we touched on, it's about exploiting ambiguity in the language. Homophones are a big one-word sounding the same, but with different meanings and spellings, like night and night.
Right.
Homographs, too, spell the same, maybe pronounced differently, different meanings, like lead, the metal, and lead, to guide. And double entendres, where a whole phrase has a surface meaning and a secondary, often slightly risque or cleverer, hidden meaning.
So the language itself is just full of these little traps and opportunities for wordplay.
It really is. English is quite flexible and ambiguous in that way, which is fertile ground.
But still, that lowest form of wit reputation persists alongside this obvious enjoyment. How do we square that?
It's a fun paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe the groan is part of the pleasure.
Yeah.
Acknowledging the cleverness, however simple, while also acknowledging its, well, punishness.
Huh. Punishness. I like that.
It might also be, as suggested, a very understated form of wit. It's not laugh-out-loud funny, necessarily, but it requires a little mental leap. And yeah, maybe that shared groan is the point, a communal experience.
Okay. Let's move back to sarcasm and irony. Navigating those waters. We know the difference, roughly, but how do you spot them in action? What are the telltale signs?
Right, practical tips. Tone of voice is probably the biggest clue. Is it flat when you'd expect emotion? Overly sweet or enthusiastic when the situation's bad. Exaggerated.
So listening for that mismatch between the words and the sound.
Exactly. Facial expression too, a deadpan look, maybe a slight smirk, rolling the eyes. Body language can play a part. In the overall context, does the statement make logical sense if taken literally? Often, with sarcasm, it doesn't.
Extreme exaggeration can be a giveaway too, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Saying something like, oh, I just love being stuck in traffic for 2 hours, the exaggeration makes the sarcastic intent pretty clear.
It's like being a bit of a detective, putting the clues together. What happens if you get it wrong? If you miss the sarcasm?
Well, awkwardness is the main result. You might take an insult as a compliment, or vice versa. It can lead to misunderstandings, obviously. And it's much harder in writing email texts because you lose all those nonverbal cues.
Yeah, the dreaded misinterpreted email.
We've all been there. And cultural differences are huge. What's like banter in one place can seem genuinely rude somewhere else.
Very true. Okay, let's really focus on those two pillars the source has identified, understatement and self-deprecation. Why are they so central?
Understatement saying less but meaning more. It really taps into that cultural value of emotional reserve we talked about. Not making a scene, keeping calm.
Stiff upper lip again.
In a way, yes. It can also be polite, avoiding sounding boastful or overly dramatic. And, critically, it fuels that dry wit. Describing something awful in mild terms creates that humorous gap. Bit of a pickle for a major crisis.
It's almost performative calmness and self-deprecation, the humor of humility.
Yeah, it's hugely important socially. It avoids arrogance, makes you relatable, builds rapport. Laughing at your own mistakes shows you don't take yourself too seriously, which is generally seen as a positive trait.
And it can disarm criticism too, right? If you make the joke about your own failing first.
Exactly. It takes the wind out of someone else's sails. And the sources gave examples ranging from personal jokes about being clumsy or bad at something, right up to that collective national self-deprecation jokes about British weather, food, queuing.
Yeah, that affectionate complaining.
Precisely. So both seem tied to ideas about modesty, avoiding showing off, and maintaining social harmony.
Okay. Beyond those core elements, the sources touched on other related forms too, didn't they?
They did. Satire and parody using humor to critique, often politics or social trends.
Yeah.
Private eye, spitting image back in the day, that kind of thing.
Right, imitation with a critical edge.
Observational comedy, as we mentioned, finding the funny in the everyday. Michael McIntyre, Peter Kay, Victoria Wood were masters of observing ordinary life.
Making the mundane hilarious.
Sitcoms. Situational comedies. Fawlty Towers, The Office UK, peep show humor from characters stuck in relatable, often awkward situations.
Claustrophobic comedy sometimes.
Can be. And surrealism, absurdism, Monty Python being the classic example, just embracing the completely bizarre.
And just general banter. Quick, witty exchanges.
Yeah, banter and wit. That rapid-fire, playful teasing is a big part of social bonding for many. And wit, just clever, amusing use of language. And the sources also noted how class and region can influence comedic styles, too.
Ah, interesting. So humor isn't uniform across the board.
Definitely not. Different regions have their own sensibilities, and class anxieties often fuel sitcom plots, for example.
It's a really complex picture. So for someone trying to, get a better handle on all this, what are the main challenges and what tips did the sources offer?
The challenges are kind of what we've been discussing. The speed, the cultural references you might not get, spotting irony or understatement, understanding puns, interpreting self-deprecation correctly, keeping up with fast banter.
Okay, so quite a few potential hurdles. What's the advice then? How can someone tune their ear?
Active listening is key. Pay attention not just to words, but tone, pauses, expressions.
Don't be afraid to ask.
Within reason, yes. Maybe not mid-punchline, but if you're generally confused, asking carefully can help. Consuming the media is huge. Watch British comedies, listen to radio shows, podcasts. You absorb it by exposure.
Get familiar with the culture more broadly.
Essential. Context is king. Also, accept you won't get every joke. Nobody does. Observe interactions between native speakers. Be patient and try to develop that irony detector. Start questioning if things are really meant literally.
Embrace the ambiguity sometimes.
Exactly. Sometimes the humor is the ambiguity.
That's really useful practical advice. Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the absolute key things you think our listeners should take away about English humor?
I think the main thing is its multifaceted nature. It's often subtle, relying on things like dryness, understatement, irony, and self-deprecation. And there's that real love of wordplay running through it.
It's not just one thing.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And it's deeply connected to cultural norms about communication, social interaction, maybe even emotional expression.
So for everyone listening, maybe the takeaway is to start noticing these things more.
Yeah.
When you're watching a British show or listening to speakers, look for that understatement. Listen for the tone in potentially ironic statements.
Yeah, absolutely. Seeing how these elements play out in real life or in media is the best way to understand them. It really does offer a richer appreciation of the culture, the way people tick.
Gives you a peek into the English psyche, as the sources sometimes put it.
Perhaps.
Right.
So next time you encounter English humor, pay attention to the delivery, the context, the unspoken stuff. See if you can spot the techniques we've talked about.
And maybe a final thought to leave people chewing on.
How about this? We often think of humor as universal, a bridge between people. But does understanding the specifics of English humor sometimes highlight the cultural differences just as much as the similarities? Does getting the joke sometimes mean understanding just how different our perspectives can be?
The serious business of laughter, indeed. Something to ponder.